This is Time Warp with your host, Tanner Fabiano, and medium, Hanna McClean. Good afternoon, listeners, and welcome to my radio talk show, Time Warp. My friend Hanna has the ability to converse with the dead, and we are using this gift to inform all of you of the unknown tragedies in the past. Today we are going to have the privilege to talk to some people who took part in the 19th century slave trade, Aminata, Chikira, and Solomon. Chikira, our first guest. Why did you keep coming back to Aminata, and why did she make you fight so hard?
From the moment I laid my eyes on Aminata, I knew that I would someday be the father of her children, and we would have a long, loving life together. I could not stop thinking about her when we were walking to the sea, and I couldn't even imagine leaving her while she traveled across alone. Aminata and I went through so much together when crossing the Atlantic Ocean to South Carolina. After we got separated, I could not bear the thought of never seeing her beautiful face again, and that was good enough motivation for me to find her and keep going back to see her. Even if that meant risking my life, and after those visits, when she and I discovered our feelings for one another, she was able to make me fight. Aminata is the strongest woman. She had that type of strength that could rub off on others and inclined them to keep pushing forward.
And what were you thinking on the ship before you died?
I was overwhelmed with disappointment. Some of those would think that the life they knew as a slave was finally coming to a tragic end would be a good thing, but I felt that I let down and left behind those that I loved. The only thing that let me die a proud man was that my wife, Aminata, was the strongest, brightest, and most becoming woman that I have ever come across in all my years. There was no doubt in my mind that she and my baby would make their way to Nova Scotia safely and live a full life with no worries.
Thank you, Chikira. And up next, we will be speaking to Solomon Lindo about his experiences with Aminata. But stay tuned. How would you feel that if your neighbor was stealing and selling kids into the sex trafficking industry? Well, did you know that Canada's very own neighbors have been doing so for countless years? 100,000 to 300,000 American children are being sold into sex slavery each year. Sex trafficking includes women, men, and children, and it is not normal if they are lured in by promises of a good-paying job, marriage, or just simply kidnapped or sold by their own parents. And welcome back. Solomon Lindo, our next guest. Why did you decide to buy Mina? Were you scared that you were going to get caught educating her?
The first time I ever met Aminata was when I was visiting one of my workers at the indigo plantation. I noticed her English was very, very strong for a Negro. That's when I came up with a clever trick. I wrote down on a piece of paper that her mother was standing behind her, and that would reveal whether she was eligible to read. After she finished the sentence, she swiftly turned around, and that was when I knew she had so much potential. She could make me so much money if I trained her as my own, a smart Negro. It was a perfect plan. I was not worried that she would get caught because she was too smart, but I also should have known how smart she was from the beginning, that she would one day leave me.
And did you feel good when you freed her?
I felt like she deserved the freedom. A mind like hers was not meant to be withheld and owned. Even though she ran away from me, I almost half expected it sooner or later. But if not, I might have even let her go. She was such a help to me over the years, especially when my wife died. I may have died in depression. Even though we lost touch over that time, I knew that out of everyone, she would stay with me.
Okay, thank you. And we'll be back with our last guest after this break. Modern slavery is present, even in the year 2013. Did you know that there are more than 27 million people enslaved today? That is double the amount of Africans taken from the entire slave trade in the 19th century. That is crazy, and it has gotten to the point that most families work 16 to 17 hours a day with no food, water, or breaks. Children less than half our age have jobs like carrying rocks that weigh more than themselves for miles, or forced to endure sexual and physical abuse while trying to persuade clients to buy their food. An African teenage boy, just like you, said to me once, "We have no freedom. We hope still, though, that we can leave this house someday and go someplace else where we can actually get paid for our dying." And we're back with our last guest, Aminata. Who was your biggest influence?
There are many influential people from my years, which I draw significance from, but the people who held the biggest influential status, without a doubt, are my parents. My mother, Syria Kulabali, was a skilled midwife who went to so many different villages. She taught me everything to know about catching babies. Even in my young years in life, she knew that having this skill would help me make a living later on. My father, Mamamo Diallo, was a jeweler and our main source of my family's food and money. He taught me about the Muslim faith and how to write Arabic phrases. He was the only man in our village who had a copy of the Quran, and he secretly taught me about it. My parents were the smartest people in all of Bayo, and I was so proud to be their daughter. That and so many more reasons is why they were the most influential figures, and without their love, faith, and knowledge, I would have not been able to make my way through the years.
Your parents sound like very great people. What was your hardest experience to overcome throughout your experience?
I have been a victim of so many different forms of abuse. All of these experiences have been difficult for me to deal, but I've learned to cope with them with my own way. Throughout my quest, the hardest thing for me to recover from was the loss of family members. I lost so many loved ones, and each time was no worse than the last. The day I was ripped from my village, Bayo, I lost my parents, and the most crucial people in my life had lost their lives to people who knew nothing about them or their story. But they were gone forever. They were my source of love, protection, and education. I had to witness their separation from the world firsthand as well, and that was the worst thing I ever had to see. When I was living in South Carolina, I came to realize my love for Shakura after he risked his life multiple times to visit me. We had a baby together, and I named him Mamadou in honor of my father. He was amazing. He was part of me. He was mine. I barely had him for a year before Appleby took him and sold him away in one night. I was so devastated I couldn't function properly. I was soon sold to Solomon Lindo because I was incapable to deal with the loss of my firstborn child. I swore that I would find my baby, but Shakura gave me the news that Mamadou was sold into a white family and died not long after. The next death I had to endure was the loss of my dear Shakura. Although we were separated for 13 years in South Carolina, our love was not. We met up once after I moved to Charleston, and it was the night he found me and told me the news of my dead child. After we were torn away from each other, the next time I reunited with my beloved husband, I knew that I would never let him go. I conceived his baby, and we had plans to leave to Nova Scotia. Things were going to be perfect, but we were sent on different ships, and later I found out that my husband's ship was lost at sea. I was devastated. I can only hope that he is in a better place now. Even though most of our lives were not spent with one another, I did not stop loving that man once. I can still remember him smiling at me foolishly the day we began the walk to the Atlantic Ocean, and I will never forget.
Okay, thank you. And thank you to our listeners for listening to this week's episode. Stay tuned for next week's guest stars about the Holocaust.